Good evening. Welcome to the Warren County Community College's Visiting Authors Series 2020 Online COVID Edition. My name is BJ Ward. I teach at the college and am the director of the series. Much gratitude to the Warren County Division of Cultural and Heritage Affairs for a grant that helps sustain the Visiting Authors Series, as well as to the New Jersey State Council on the Arts for its funding of county arts agencies. Thanks to the administration of the college for its continued support. Our guest tonight is Jhumpa Lahiri. She received the Pulitzer Prize in 2000 for Interpreter of Maladies, her debut story collection. Her second book, the novel, The Namesake, was turned into a popular and well-regarded film. Another book of short stories, Unaccustomed Earth, received the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, which is the world's largest prize for a short story collection, and was a finalist for the Story Prize. Her book, The Lowland, won the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature and was a finalist for both the Man Booker Prize and the National Book Award in Fiction. She recently edited and partly translated the Penguin Book of Italian Short Stories. In 2021, she will publish her first collection of poems in Italian, Il Quaderno di Nerina. Her first full-length self-translation is her forthcoming novel, Whereabouts, to be released on May 4th in 2021 by Knopf. Originally written in Italian, it was published as Dove mi trovo in 2018. And I'm thrilled to say the reading she'll do tonight will be her first public reading of the English version of this novel. She's been awarded the prestigious National Humanities Medal by the National Endowment for the Humanities at the White House, the PEN/Hemingway Award, an O. Henry Prize for the short story Interpreter of Maladies, and the Addison Metcalf Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, among many others. In 2019, she was named the director of Princeton University's program in creative writing. She was also named commander of the Italian Republic in 2019 by President Sergio Mattarella. It is difficult to introduce Jhumpa Lahiri and keep the introduction short because it feels like I'm leaving something unsaid. Her work is rich and earthy, layered yet inviting, and so polished you don't even realize the day was stolen from you as you're reading it. She's not in a small stakes game. Revelations take years, tragedies can be suddenly reckoned with or realized after a long, slow burn. Rhythms overlaid and penetrated by other music, nuances of joy and grief holding together these sentences with such brilliant syntax, Frank Lloyd Wright would have studied them if he were still alive. Moral dilemmas that offer the reader a harbor to dock at every character's failings and humanity. Her large and loyal following of readers grew with each book. As the New York Times Book Review has stated, Lahiri handles her characters without leaving any fingerprints. Her work is inspiring for so many of us other writers. It is an honor and a pleasure to welcome her tonight to Warren County Community College's Visiting Author Series. Jhumpa Lahiri.
Hello.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, BJ. What a beautiful introduction you gave. I'm so touched. And
thank you very much.
Frank Lloyd Wright, wow. that's amazing. That really made my day.
Thank you.
And then some. But thank you. It's very generous and very beautiful words. Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for being out there, and thank you to Warren County Community College for this invitation. I'm looking forward to to sharing a little bit of this book with you and then answering some questions. So as BJ said, this is actually the first time I'm going to read from Whereabouts. This is, I'll hold up the book. There's a galley. Anyway, that's the book in English. And this is the Italian version. And so what I thought I would do is just read a tiny, tiny bit from the Italian, just to give you a taste of the language and how it sounds. And then I'll immediately shift into reading from the beginning of the novel in English. So the first chapter, it's a book of 40 odd very short chapters. I think there are 45 or 46 chapters. I can't remember anymore. And each of them takes place in a specific place, as you'll begin to recognize as I read the chapter titles out loud. In any case, the first chapter is called Sul marciapiede in Italian, which means on the sidewalk. So this is a little bit of the Italian of the beginning of the novel. Sul marciapiede. Al mattino dopo colazione superò una piccola lapide di marmo appoggiata contro il muro alto della strada. Non ho mai conosciuto il morto, eppure con gli anni conosco il suo nome, il cognome. So il mese e il giorno della sua nascita e della scomparsa. È morto quest'uomo 2 giorni dopo il suo compleanno, a febbraio. Deve essere stato un incidente in bici o in moto, oppure camminava di notte, sbadato, forse è stato investito in pieno. That's just a little taste of the Italian. And now I'm going to move to the page proofs in English. So, in English this time, on the sidewalk. In the mornings after breakfast, I walk past a small marble plaque propped against the high wall flanking the road. I never knew the man who died, but over the years I've come to know his name, his surname. I know the month and day he was born and the month and day his life ended. This was a man who died 2 days after his birthday, in February. It must have been an accident on his bike or his motorcycle. Or maybe he was walking at night, distracted. Maybe he was hit by a passing car. He was 44 when it happened. I suppose he died in this very spot, on the sidewalk, next to the wall that sprouts neglected plants, which is why the plaque has been arranged at the bottom, at the feet of passers-by. The road is full of curves and snakes uphill. It's a bit dangerous. The sidewalk is vexing, crowded with exposed tree roots. Some sections are nearly impossible to negotiate because of the roots. That's why I too tend to walk on the road. There's usually a candle burning in a container of red glass, along with a small bunch of flowers and the statue of a saint. There's no photograph of him. Above the candle, attached to the wall, there's a note from his mother, written by hand, encased in a milky plastic sleeve. It greets those who stop for a moment to ponder the death of her son. I would like to personally thank those who dedicate a few minutes of their time to my son's memory. But if that's not possible, I thank you anyway, from the bottom of my heart, it says. I've never seen the mother or any other person in front of the plaque. Thinking of the mother just as much as the son, I keep walking, feeling slightly less alive. On the street. Now and then on the streets of my neighborhood, I bump into a man I might have been involved with, maybe shared a life with. He always looks happy to see me. He lives with a friend of mine, and they have 2 children. Our relationship never goes beyond a longish chat on the sidewalk, a quick coffee together, perhaps a brief stroll in the same direction. He talks excitedly about his projects, he gesticulates, and now and then as we're walking, our synchronized bodies, already quite close, discreetly overlap. One time he accompanied me into a lingerie shop because I had to choose a pair of tights to wear under a skirt. I just bought the skirt and I needed the tights for that same evening. Our fingers grazed the textures splayed out on the counter as we sorted through the various colors. The binder of samples was like a book full of flimsy, transparent pages. He was totally calm among the bras, the nightgowns, as if he were in a hardware store and not surrounded by intimate apparel. I was torn between the green and the purple. He was the one who convinced me to choose the purple, and the saleslady, putting the tights into the bag, said, "Your husband's got a great eye." Pleasant encounters like this break up our daily meanderings. We have a chaste, fleeting bond. As a result, it can't advance. It can't take the upper hand. He's a good man. He loves my friend and their children. I'm content with a firm embrace, even though I don't share my life with anyone. 2 kisses on the cheeks, a short walk along a stretch of road. Without saying a word to each other, we know that, if we chose to, we could venture into something reckless, also pointless. This morning he's distracted. He doesn't recognize me until I'm right in front of him. He's crossing a bridge at one end, and I'm arriving from the other. We stop in the middle and look at the wall that flanks the river, and the shadows of pedestrians cast on its surface. They look like skittish ghosts advancing in a row, obedient souls passing from one realm to another. The bridge is flat, and yet it looks as if the figures, vaporous shapes against the solid wall, are walking uphill, always climbing. They're like inmates who proceed silently toward a dreadful end. It would be great one day to film this procession, he says. You can't always see it. It depends on the position of the sun. But I'm always amazed. There's something hypnotizing about it. Even when I'm in a hurry, I stop to watch. So do I. He pulls out his cell phone. Should we try? How does it look? I ask. No good. This contraption can't capture them. We continue to watch the mute spectacle, the dark bodies that advance, never stopping. Where are you headed? Work. Me too. Should we have a coffee? I don't have time today. Okay. Ciao. See you soon. We say goodbye, separate. Then we too become 2 shadows projected on the wall. A routine spectacle, impossible to capture. In the office. It's hard to focus here. I feel exposed, surrounded by colleagues and students who walk down the hallways. Their movements and their chatter gets on my nerves. I try in vain to enliven the space. Every week I turn up with a shopping bag heavy with books from home to fill the shelves. That pain in my shoulder, that weight, all that effort amounts to little in the end. It would take 2 years, 3, to fill the bookcase. It's too capacious. It covers an entire wall. In any case, my office is now vaguely inviting, boasting a framed print, a plant, 2 cushions. And yet, it's a space that perplexes me, that keeps me at arm's length. I open the door, set down my bag, and prepare for the day. I answer emails and choose what book I'd like my students to read. I'm here to earn a living. My heart's not in it. I look through the window at the sky. I listen to some music. I read and correct student papers. And in so doing, I revisit the books I'd once loved so deeply. Occasionally, a brave soul knocks on the door and asks my advice about something, maybe a favor. The student sits in front of me, confident, full of ambition. Given that I'm always coming and going, my thoughts can't manage to settle down here. My colleagues tend to keep to themselves, as do I. Maybe they find me prickly, unpleasant. Who knows? We're forced to inhabit close quarters. We're told to be accessible. and yet I feel peripheral. I gather that the colleague who used this office before me would sleep here now and then. I wonder, how and where? On the floor? On a woolen blanket? He was a poet. His widow once told me that he loved the nocturnal silence of this building, when there wasn't a soul to be seen. If a poem came to him here, he said, he wouldn't leave until it was finished. At home, in the pretty study furnished by his wife, he felt less at ease. He loved writing here. He wouldn't mind the bland color of the walls, the dull carpet. The bleakness inspired him. He was an elderly man, a daydreamer, his head whirling with words that found their proper order in this room. He died 2 years ago, not here, but he's left something of himself behind. Maybe that's why this room feels a bit sepulchral. At the trattoria. I often have lunch at a trattoria close to my house. It's a hole in the wall, and if I don't get there by noon, I won't get a seat, and I'll have to wait until after 2. I eat alone, next to others, eating alone. They're people I don't know, though I frequently encounter a familiar face. A father cooks, and his daughter waits the tables. I believe the mother died when the daughter was a young girl. This father and daughter share a bond beyond their common blood, one that's been fortified by grief. They're not from around here. Though they work all day on a noisy street, they come from an island. They store the sun's blaze in their bones, barren hills dotted with sheep, the mistral that churns the sea. I picture them together on a boat they've anchored in front of a secluded grotto. I see the daughter diving off the prow, and the father holding a fish that's still breathing in his hands. Technically, the daughter isn't a waitress, given that she's always behind the counter. What can we get you? The menu is handwritten on the blackboard in a compact, whimsical script. I choose a different dish each day of the week. She takes the order and then tells her father, who is always in the kitchen, what to prepare. When I sit down, the daughter brings me a bottle of water, a paper napkin, then resumes her place behind the counter. I wait for my tray to appear, then stand up to retrieve it. Today, among the tourists and employees who frequent my neighborhood, there's a young father with his daughter. She's around 10 years old, with 2 blonde braids, hunched shoulders, a distracted gaze. Normally I see them on Saturdays, but there's no school this week. It's Easter vacation. By now I know the drill. The daughter refuses to sleep at her father's house. She'll only spend the night with her mother. I used to see them back when they were a family of 3, in this very trattoria. I remember when the mother was pregnant with the daughter, and how excited the couple was. I recall how intimately they would speak to one another, and the good wishes expressed by those sitting around them. They would come to have lunch here even after they became a family. They'd turn up, tired and hungry, after going to the playground or shopping for food in the piazza. I felt a connection with the little girl, an only child like me, seated between her parents. It's just that my father never liked eating in restaurants. Last year, the mother moved out of our neighborhood, leaving the father behind. And he's frustrated, I'd say exasperated, by the daughter, who remains so loyal to her mother, who refuses to stay at his place, in the house where she was first raised, in the room always awaiting her arrival. The daughter plays with her cell phone while the father attempts to speak to her, to convince her. I feel sorry listening to him plead. I feel sorry for the parting of ways between this father and daughter, and for the demise of the marriage. Apparently, the mother left because he was cheating on her, a passionate affair that's already ended. How was school last week? He asks. The girl shrugs. Can you give me a ride to a friend's place tonight? I thought you and I might go to the movies. I don't feel like it. I want to go to my friends. What will you do there? I'll have fun. And then? I'll go home to Mom's. The father gives in. He stops trying, this week, to convince her. Now he too looks at his cell phone, She only eats part of her dish, and he finishes it for her. In spring. In spring I suffer. The season doesn't invigorate me. I find it depleting. The new light disorients. The fulminating nature overwhelms. And the air, dense with pollen, bothers my eyes. To calm my allergies, I take a pill in the morning that makes me sleepy. It knocks me out. I can't focus. And by lunchtime, I'm tired enough to go to bed. I sweat all day, and at night, I'm freezing. No shoe seems right for this temperamental time of year. Every blow in my life took place in spring, each lasting sting. That's why I'm afflicted by the green of the trees, the first peaches in the market, the light flowing skirts that the women in my neighborhood start to wear. These things only remind me of loss, of betrayal, of disappointment. I dislike waking up and feeling pushed inevitably forward. But today, Saturday, I don't have to leave the house. I can wake up and not have to get up. There's nothing better. In the piazza. The daughter of two friends of mine lives alone, like me, in this city. But she's only 16. She arrived 3 years ago with her father, her stepmother, and a stepbrother much younger than she is. The father is a painter and had a big fellowship at an academy up on the hill. I'd met them at one of his exhibits. The painter and his wife used to come to my place for Italian lessons. The daughter never joined them. She attended a high school nearby, and 2 years later she decided not to return to her country of origin, to separate early from her family and stay on here. She has a room in an apartment the high school oversees, a special residence to house students in her situation. I call her when there is an exhibit I want to see, or when the sales begin at the end of winter and the start of summer. I promised my friends I'd keep an eye on her, even though this girl doesn't need very much from me. I watch her as she cycles through the piazza. She could be my daughter, given that I'm 30 years older, but she's already a woman with a beauty that's disarming. A girl who smiles as she speaks, as if to declare to the world, "See how happy I am." Nothing like I was at her age. Still a child, no boyfriends, ill at ease. I'm envious. I still regret my squandered youth, the absence of rebellion. She's just come back after spending a week with her family. She's relieved to have put some distance between them again. She tells me that spending 7 days in a row together is rough, that her father and stepmother are always bickering, and that they should separate. Don't they love each other? I doubt it. My dad just wants to paint, and she's at loose ends. She waits on him hand and foot, and it drives him crazy. And your mother? Did you see her? She got married again to a guy I don't like. She drinks a glass of pomegranate juice. It looks like a glass of blood, though I don't tell her that. She says she's hungry and asks for a cornetto. She splits it in half, then divides one of the pieces. She takes a small bite, then arranges the rest of the pieces on her napkin. People turn to look at her as we're sitting in the piazza, but she doesn't pay them heed. She's fluent in the language her parents struggled to speak. She doesn't look like a tourist or a foreigner. She's the type that fits in anywhere. The parents are worried. They're hoping she'll change her mind and decide to go to a university that's closer to home. I don't tell them when we speak on the phone that they've already lost her. Full of dreams and plans, she believes it's still possible to change the world. She's already brave enough to stand up to authority, and she's determined to make a life for herself here. I'm fond of this girl. Her grit inspires me. At the same time, I think about myself back then and feel depressed as she tells me about the boys that want to date her, amusing stories that make us both laugh. I can't manage to erase a sense of ineptitude. I feel sad as I laugh. I didn't know love at her age. What did I do? I read books and studied. I listened to my parents and did what they asked me to. even though in the end I never made them happy. I didn't like myself, and something told me I'd end up alone. I talked to your father yesterday. He told me it's raining a lot in your city. It's not my city anymore. Why don't you like it there? Because I can't stand my stepmother. She has no life, no voice of her own. My mom was basically the same. That's why my dad left her. That dynamic doesn't work anymore. I want to be a strong woman, independent, like you. I might have said the same thing to her. Instead, I say nothing. I watch as she arranges the pieces of uneaten cornetto inside the paper napkin, making a small bundle that she then nestles inside the juice glass. And I ask for the check. In the waiting room. After turning 45, after a long and fortunate phase of hardly ever going to the doctor, I grow acquainted with illness. A series of mysterious pains, odd afflictions that would arise out of the blue and then go away, an abiding pressure behind my eyes, a sharp twinge at my elbow, a portion of my face that seemed to have gone numb for a time. Scattered round red spots on my abdomen once generated a stubborn itch so persistent I'd had to go to the emergency room. In the end, all it took was an ointment. For the past few days, there's been a strange sensation under the skin of my throat, something along the lines of an irregular palpitation. I only feel it when I'm sitting at home, reading on my couch. That is, when I'm most relaxed, when I'm expecting to feel at peace. It lasts for a few seconds, then passes. When I explained this one morning to my barista, a person I confide all sorts of things to, though I couldn't tell you why, he said, I'd get it checked out. There's a vein there that connects your brain to your heart. Take my advice. And the gentleman standing next to me at the bar, a retired history professor who drinks a glass of beer at the start of each day, added, my poor wife, God rest her soul, had complained of something similar. So I went to see the doctor, and after he saw me, after he checked my heartbeat with a shoddy-looking device, he referred me to a cardiologist. It's most likely nothing, Signora. But given that you're no longer a child, it's best to make sure. And so here I am at this clinic. The room's a bit dark, the lights are off. The heat feels excessive, even though in general I tend to prefer the heat. I start to take off my jacket and scarf right away. There's just one other patient waiting, another woman trapped with me in the room. She looks about 20 years older than I am. She watches me carefully, without warmth in her eyes. Her gaze is impenetrable. I can't manage to remove the scarf. It's gotten tangled up with my necklace. How ridiculous. The woman keeps looking at me as if there were a screen between us, as if I were a person on television. I unhook the necklace clasp, feeling rattled, and sit down. I ask, how is this, doctor? Any good? I wouldn't know. I wait 15 minutes. I go on waiting. The other woman also waits. They don't call us in. She doesn't read. She doesn't do anything. She doesn't look at me anymore, not even through the television screen. Unfortunately, I forgot to put a book in my purse. There are no magazines, only a few brochures about health, about taking care of one's heart. What's this woman's ailment? Is she afraid? I'm tempted to ask her these questions, to break the ice. After all, it's just the two of us. But I know better. Even though I don't feel any palpitations at the moment, I'm certain that sooner or later, that vague, worrisome tick will act up again, below my skin, where there's a vein that connects my heart to my brain. No one keeps this woman company, no caregiver, no friend, no husband. And I bet she knows that in 20 years, when I happen to be in a waiting room like this one, for some reason or other, I won't have anyone sitting beside me either. In the bookstore. Inevitably, I bump into my ex, the only significant one, with whom I was involved for 5 years. I'm amazed when I see him and say hello. that I ever loved him. He still lives in my neighborhood, alone. He's a small but handsome man with thin-rimmed glasses and tapered hands that lend him an intellectual air. But he's never amounted to much. He remains puerile and full of complaints, in spite of his middle-aged man's body. Here he is today in the bookstore. He stops in often. He fancies himself a writer. He was always writing something in a notebook, though I have no idea what. I doubt he's ever managed to publish anything. Have you read this? He asks me, pointing to a book that just got a prize. I don't know it. You should. He looks at me and adds, You're looking well. You think? I'm a mess. I hardly slept last night. Why not? The kids in the bar under my apartment are too rowdy. It's an ongoing problem. I need to find a new place. Where? Away from this godforsaken city. I've been thinking of buying a little house by the seaside, or maybe in the mountains, far from everything and everyone. Are you serious? He'll never do it. He's not the type. He's too fearful. When we were together, all I did was listen to him. I would try to solve all his problems, even tiny ones. Every time his back went out, every existential crisis. But by now I can look at him without absorbing a drop of that tiresome anxiety, that ongoing lament. He was dreadful at planning or remembering things. Distracted, the opposite of me. He never checked to see what was in the fridge. He'd buy the same stuff twice. We were always tossing food out that had gone bad. He was almost always late. There was always some hitch. We were always rushing into the theater halfway into the movie. In the beginning it would irritate me, but I got used to it. I adored him. I forgave him. When we'd go on vacation together, he would inevitably forget something essential. Shoes for walking, a cream to protect his skin, the notebook for jotting things down. He'd forget to pack the heavy sweater or the lightweight shirt. He was prone to getting fevers. I have seen several small cities alone while he recovered in a hotel room, while he slept, pallid, in the bed, coated with sweat under the covers. I made him broth when we got home. I prepared the hot water bottle. I ran to the pharmacy. I didn't mind playing nurse. Both his parents had died when he was young. You're all I've got in this world, he'd say. I was happy to cook at his place. I'd spend all morning doing the shopping. I'd crisscross the city for the meals I prepared for him. I remember absurd expeditions from one neighborhood to another, searching for a particular cheese, for the shiniest eggplants. I'd arrive at his door. I'd set the table. He'd take his place and say, What would I do without your soup, without your roast chicken? Convinced that I was the center of his universe, I took it for granted that sooner or later he'd ask me to marry him. Then one day in April, someone rung my buzzer. I thought it was him. Instead, it was another woman who knew my boyfriend just as well as I did, who saw him on the days I didn't. I'd shared the same man with this woman for nearly 5 years. She lived in another neighborhood, and she'd come to know about me thanks to a book I'd lent him, the same book that he, idiotically, in turn, had lent to her. Unbelievable. Inside that book, there was a piece of paper, the receipt from a doctor's visit with my name and address. At which point, all the little things that puzzled her about their relationship made sense. She realized that she was only one of his lovers, and that we were in an unwitting threesome. Did you tell him that you found that receipt, that you were coming to see me? I asked her, once I was able to speak. She was a short woman with bangs, caring eyes, a glow to her skin. She spoke calmly. She had a soothing voice. I didn't tell him anything. I didn't see the point. I just wanted to meet you. Would you like a coffee? We sat down and started to chat. Pulling out our agendas, we reviewed point by point details of our parallel relationships, vacations and other memorable moments, herniated discs, bouts of the flu. It was a long and harrowing conversation, a meticulous exchange of information, of disparate dates that solved a mystery, that dispelled a nightmare I'd been unconsciously living. We realized that we were two survivors, and in the end, we felt like partners in a crime. Each revelation was devastating, everything he said. And yet, even as my life shattered to pieces, I felt as if we were finally coming up. I felt as if I were finally coming up for air. The sun started to set, and we were hungry, and when there was nothing left to do or say, we went out to share a meal. I'll just read one last bit, and then we'll end. In my head. Solitude, it's become my trade. As it requires a certain discipline, it's a condition I try to perfect, and yet it plagues me, it weighs on me in spite of my knowing it so well. It's probably my mother's influence. She's always been afraid of being alone, and now her life as an old woman torments her so much that when I call to ask how she's doing, she just says, "I'm very alone." She says she misses having amusing and surprising experiences. This even though she has lots of friends who love her and a social life far more complicated and lively than mine. The last time I went to visit her, for example, the phone kept ringing. And yet she's always on edge. I'm not sure why. She's burdened by the passage of time. When I was young, even when my father was alive, she kept me close to her side. She never wanted us to be apart, not even briefly. She safeguarded me. She protected me from solitude as if it were a nightmare or a wasp. We were an unhealthy amalgam until I left to lead a life of my own. Was I the shield between her and her terror? Was I the one who kept her from sinking into the abyss? Was it the fear of her fear that's led me to a life like this? For years we've both been alone, and I know that deep down she'd like to reconstruct that amalgam, thereby extinguishing our mutual solitude. In her opinion, it would solve both our problems. But since I don't give in, since I refuse to live in the same city, I prolong her suffering. If I tell my mother that I'm grateful to be on my own, to be in charge of my space and my time, this in spite of the silence, in spite of the lights I never switch off when I leave the house, along with the radio I always keep playing, she'd look at me unconvinced. She'd say solitude was a lack and nothing more. There's no point in discussing it, given that she's blind to the small pleasures my solitude affords me. In spite of how she's clung to me over the years, my point of view doesn't interest her. And this gulf between us has taught me what solitude really means. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that opening of Whereabouts. Little blown away. I can't wait for the book to come out on May 4th. Do all the titles begin with in the and
Yeah,
hence
they're all
the chapter?
prepositions. Yeah, each one is a prepositional phrase or small, in, on, exactly. So the title kind of grows out of that.
And the vein that connects the head to the heart, I mean, the brain to the heart. My goodness, how you play that. Thank you so much for sharing it. It's exciting for me to host the reading where you read from that book for the first time. I'm sure it's exciting for everyone viewing too. I'd like to bring in my colleagues of Kerry Frabizio, who's an associate professor of English at the college, and also Brian Bradford, who's professor of creative writing and English, who have some questions for you that they would like to ask. A little interview here after the reading. Bradford is up first.
Dr. Lahiri, I want to thank you as well for just a truly memorable and inspiring reading. And it is an honor to have the opportunity to interview you for the college's Visiting Author Series. I do have a request before I begin. A while back, you were asked about your writing process, specifically how you got started with the story. And I believe your answer, you said, I hear sentences. I hear sentences while staring out the window, chopping vegetables, standing on a subway platform alone. And I just know they're right, and things begin to piece together. My request is simply this: before the evening is over, would you please tell me which subway platform that is?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depended on where I was living in the city at the time, or or even earlier when I was living in Boston when I started really writing, and so there were various platforms of the T, which is the name for the above and below ground mass transit there.
I need to make a pilgrimage there and spend some time. Thank you. My question is this, and I know you've probably been asked some form of this question before. In regards to the underlying tension you create in your fiction, that's a tension brought on by contrast, male and female perspective, the contrast of city and country, and of course, the contrast of diversity, different cultures. America, where you were raised, in Bengali, India, your parents' place of origin. And you allude to this in an interview you gave for Book Browse a while ago. You specifically mentioned visits to Calcutta, which you found, quote, fascinating, so different from the small New England town where I was raised. You go on to say, on these visits, you went neither as tourist nor as former resident. Would you elaborate on this a bit more and how that, and this fascinates me, that necessary combination of distance and intimacy, your words, distance and intimacy, has impacted on your work? And what are the challenges you face striking that balance of distance and intimacy?
Well, I think that's the writer's position, right? I think we have to maintain a strange state of equilibrium between distance and intimacy, because we need the distance. We need the distance to see and to think, and to have perspective on what we're trying to write. But then so much of writing comes out of such deep places and who we are and things we felt so acutely, right? And things that overwhelm us, things that are, that churn up such great emotions we don't even know how to put words to them, and yet we try. So I think, yeah, it's a sort of contradictory state that we have to achieve and maintain in order to be writers. And so I think what I was getting at when thinking about sort of what those trips to Calcutta trained me to do in some sense, or put me into that paradoxical state, just as a person. I wasn't writing when I was a kid, but I was a person, and I was observing things, and I was existing, and I realized there wasn't really a category for my experience, one that I could put a name to, because I saw people who lived there, who always lived there, and had a deep sense of belonging to the place. And then I saw my mother and father who were returning and having the experience of someone who goes back, who goes home. And then I would see a third category. I would see tourists, right? I would see people coming from other parts of India or from outside of India, people staying in hotels, people looking at the city with a totally different agenda and objectives and context. And it was the inability to really fully identify with any of those categories, right? That made me feel alone, that made me question my place in the world from a very young age. But I think that's something all writers do at some point, right? They do question their place in the world. They should. We all should.
Yes, thank you very much.
Hi, Dr. Lahiri. In what you just read from Whereabouts, and in so many of your works, the personal items that your characters have are so revealing. And many of our students talked about that when we read Interpreter of Melodies recently. In this portion from Whereabouts that you just read, the fact that the character goes shopping for tights is so interesting to me. Of all of the things you could have had her shop for, what a wonderful idea. And then the pieces of clothing that her ex doesn't bring on vacation, I think are so revealing about their relationship as well. Can you talk a little bit about how you create that characterization and how those objects are chosen?
I don't know. I mean, I think characters are composites of so many things, including the things we own, right? The things that surround us, that literally the objects that make us who we are. And I think about objects a lot because, well, first of all, because right now I have this life in two very different places, right? So I'm always very aware of sort of what do I have here and what do I have there and what do I need to bring there versus what can I leave behind. And I'm always there. It's never 100%, right? You always realize, oh, I should have, or oh, right. But I think that's sort of an interesting metaphor for a lot of things. That there is no, you can't really control completely how you'd like things to be. And I think going on trips kind of opens up so much mystery and so much, it opens you up to kind of a vulnerability to a lack of control, literally, over your environment, right? Even if you're going back to a familiar place or to a home. So I think about that. I think about I mean, the older I get, I think about the reality that objects outlive us. What happens to things when we're gone? What value do they take? How do they outlive us? And this book explores that. So I'm grateful that you picked up on this theme, if you will, because there in subsequent chapters there's kind of an increasing focus on objects themselves and the character's relationship to certain objects, whether they're hers or whether she's acquiring them. They're so freighted in that way, and I think, I don't know, I mean, this book was born in Rome, right? It was born from my life in Rome and my time there. And I mean, apart from the fact that, in Rome, you're always surrounded by the past, needless to say, but one of my past times in Rome is going to a big flea market in my neighborhood in Trastevere. And I love it. I love going and wandering and looking at all of these objects. And at the same time, it's like, each time it's so, when I stop to think about it, it's just overwhelming to think about who owned these things, who did they all belong to, what homes did they inhabit, who loved them and touched them, and who got upset when they got lost or broken, or so objects speak to us, and they represent so much of, as I said, of who we are. And so for characters, I always try to think about that element, that aspect of them.
Thank you. Fantastic. I think Brian is going to come back in. There he is.
You have to unmute yourself, Brian.
I'm there, yeah. There's been much written about your ability to create wholly believable male characters and narrators, and we see this across the catalog of your work, perhaps no more clearly than an interpreter of maladies, Sanjeev in This Blessed House, Mr. Kizarda, and the first-person male narrator in The Third and Final Continent. That is my favorite piece in that extraordinary collection. And I know you've been asked this question many times before, so forgive the redundancy. But what moves you to make the decision to write from a male perspective? What are some of the challenges and rewards of taking this risk?
Well, I'm a curious person, and so I'm curious about what it would be like to be male, because I'm not, right? So, oops, sorry, that's actually my parents calling. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I think it was curiosity in the beginning, and still, I mean, now I feel more like in my writing. I mean, I've been writing for a while now, and so I feel that I have a female character kind of set of tools, and I have a male character set of tools. I mean, I've built those tools over the years. But it always felt, I mean, even in the beginning, I remember reflecting when after I'd put Introverted Maladies together, that there actually were all of these male narrators, and I wondered about that. I mean, I just wondered, I wonder what made me do that. And I do think it was curiosity. You know, I didn't have a brother. I don't have a brother. I have a sister. So I didn't have, I wasn't close to a male consciousness when I was in my, you know, in my formative years. And so I think I was very curious about what that might be like. Because I think writers are, you know, they want to know things outside of themselves, you know, they're exploring themselves, but at the same time, I think, at least for me, you know, trying to understand who I am, but I'm also trying to understand what the world outside of me and my self and my body and my consciousness and my experiences, I also want to understand that, that whole wide universe out there that has nothing to do with me. So I think that's part of the inspiration for these, you know, male characters. And thank you for your kind words about that story, The Third and Final Continent. So in that case, I was, you know, I was trying to sort of understand my own father, and I was so scared to write about him in the first person, and I've tried to avoid that. I tried to write the story in the third person, thinking that would be less invasive somehow. But the story wasn't really working until I wrote it in the first person. So it felt really like, to me, that felt like a big step, and it was. That was more of a big step. It was a bigger step, I should say, than, you know, the intellectual idea of creating a male narrator. It was much more, to me, it was much more of a, you know, seemed more transgressive to try to write from my own father's point of view.
Just a follow-up question. Are there any male writers, contemporary or past, that you believe accurately capture the nuance and complexity of female characters or narrators? Does anybody come to mind?
Oh, so many. I mean, you know, from Tolstoy and Flaubert and William Trevor. It's beautiful women, paints beautiful portraits of women in his writing. The writer, my friend, Domenico Starnone, I believe now Italy's greatest writer, and I've translated now 3 of his novels, writes very powerfully from a female point of view. So many of the classical authors that I love, you know, the Greek and Latin authors that I love, have explored the female consciousness with such power. I've always believed in the writer's ability to transcend questions of gender. I've always believed that in the right hands, that writers have both, you know, they have both inside of them, any consciousness, you know.
Thank you very much.
We have time for one more question, and it'll come from my colleague, Kerry Frabizio.
Thanks, BJ. I know you've been asked versions of this before, but you've called yourself a literary pilgrim to Rome. And we have many students who are studying English as a second or third language, so they're literary pilgrims to New Jersey. Decidedly less romantic than being a literary pilgrim to Rome, I think. But can you talk a bit about how your writing process is different in Italian than your writing process is in English?
Well, it's changed over the years. I've been doing it now for you know, since 2012. That's 8 years now and counting. So it's grown from something totally unnatural to quite natural, right? So it's really I've seen I've lived my own learning curve, as it were. You know, it's like when you're learning to walk, you know, now, you know, I've had 2 children, so I've witnessed what it's like, you know, when the child starts crawling and then picks themselves up and then takes the first step and the second step and then suddenly they're running and there's no stopping them. We in our adult lives don't have a memory of that, right? We don't have a memory of learning that. But that's what happens, right? And so I think by teaching myself to write in Italian, I lived through that kind of process. You know, I lived through oh my God, I'm on all fours and can I get up? Can I hold on to the coffee table? Can I take a step? What does that feel like? Can I let go with one hand? Can I let go with both hands? And I was so aware of each of those moments as I was writing. You know, I was so acutely aware of what this was going to mean, and or what the next step would possibly mean. You know, so there was something sort of pushing me forward. And now it's a very different process. You know, now I just sort of go and I walk and I'm out there and I'm walking, you know, metaphorically walking through the world in Italian. But always aware of that learning curve. That's the difference. That's the difference. So I never take it for granted, you know, the way I take my ability to walk for granted, for example, even though I did learn it. We all did, right? We are not born that way. We learn it. So it's something I'm just very aware of, and sometimes I still can't believe it, you know. I still can't believe that that I have this other capacity now, or this other brain, if you will, this other soul as well. But I built it. I built it and I cultivated it and I continue to cultivate it, and this is the fruit that's coming. And it's a different process, certainly, from writing in English, but it's not as much, the gulf isn't as enormous anymore, right? It's a little, they're just different. And I feel different freedoms now in each language, you know. I mean, in English, I still feel the freedom of a certain ongoing questioning of the way something sounds, because I'm so much more familiar with English, and because I'm so much more familiar with the rhythms and the patterns and the syntax and the way the language, you know, it's like knowing it's like swimming in a different sea. That's what it is. Like, I've learned to swim in Italian. It's just a different sea. So the temperature's a little different. The current moves a little bit more, you know, differently. It's not as familiar. But that's also what makes it exciting, right?
Right. Do you feel that way about writing in poetry in Italian? Do you feel like that's another step?
Totally another step. Yeah, I mean, I never wrote a poem in English in my whole life, unless you count like poems I had to write when I was in, you know, junior high school or high school, when it was like an assignment, like write a sonnet, write a haiku. So I did those things, but I never felt that I was a poet. I always felt that poetry was another language, and it is. It's another language, and I love it. I love poetry, and I always loved reading poetry in English, and in other languages too, but mainly in English. And I studied poetry for so long in my studies in college and in graduate school, but I never thought it was a language that I could speak until this whole Italian conversion, or whatever you want to call it, you know, and then suddenly everything I was writing was coming out in verse, and this book was born, and it was so shocking and wonderful at the same time.
That's amazing. So you freed yourself not only to write in Italian, but to write in a completely different mode than you'd ever written in English. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, it's like one thing leads you to the other, right? One, like layers, right? I'm either adding layers to myself, but I actually think I like to think of it as that I'm actually peeling off layers.
Sure.
Because I think the more I go deeper into Italian, the more I'm actually peeling layers off of myself, right? And I'm unable to access things that are buried deep down there, which is the writer's goal, is to get to that stuff that's like way down there, right? And you write yourself into it. You have to write yourself down there. There's no other way to get it. And I think the writing in Italian gives me this new tool to get at it in a different way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for everything tonight. Thank you so much, especially for reading from Whereabouts. It was incredible.
Thank you. It's very special and thrilling for me to share this work with you for the first time, and it's nice to be not too far away. Yeah, and lovely to meet you all. Thank you. Thank you so much for your warm welcome and your questions.
So wonderful of you. Thank you very much. This is Jhumpa Lahiri. The book she read from is called Whereabouts, out on May 4th, 2021. Jhumpa, thank you for your generosity, of your reading, of your answers, of your thoughtfulness. Thank you, Kerry Frabizio. Thank you, Brian Bradford, for your great questions. I'm BJ Ward, your host. This is the Visiting Author Series 2020 COVID edition. There haven't been a lot of bright spots of 2020, but Jhumpa, this was absolutely one of them for us, for the college, and I'm sure for everyone who's enjoyed this evening. Thank you again. Take care, everyone. Be safe. See you down the road.
Thank you. Be well. Thank you so much.